Philadelphia, the pinnacle of the Holy Father's trip to America. He'll meet the faithful, over 1 million expected, just for a glimpse of Pope Francis in person.
This is the Catholic jackpot.
What a blessing for him to hold our child and kiss her.
He attended a festival, made a historic speech at Independence Hall.
God bless you all.
Now, the final event, a mass and tickets running out in seconds. What surprises are in store for the thousands of faithful gathering on the city streets? You've seen the pontiff mingle with America's leaders. Now see him in the way he's known best, the people's pope. And there you see the scene. Thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands gathering now, waiting for the Pope's big moment today. The huge mass begins around 4 o'clock this afternoon, just behind me on Benjamin Franklin Parkway here in Philadelphia. It is his final homily in the U.S., the final celebration of Mass. Organizers say as many as 1 million people are hoping to see and hear Pope Francis deliver that service that'll close the Festival of Families. In the next hour or so, the Pope will begin taking an open motorcade to the Mass. We, of course, are going to be covering all of that for you live. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and watching around the world. I'm Anderson Cooper, live in Philadelphia. Amid all the events expected today, there was one that was never on the original public schedule, at least, though it was one of the most highly anticipated of the trip. Pope Francis met privately with 5 victims of sexual abuse. The Pope listened to each victim's testimony, all of them adults who as minors had been abused by either clergy members, family members, or teachers. Immediately following, he addressed 150 seminarians and went off script, confronting the crisis more strongly than we've heard in past speeches.
Dios llora.
God weeps.
Los crímenes y pecados de los abusos sexuales a
For the
menores
sexual
no
abuse
pueden ser
of children,
mantenidos en secreto por
these
más
cannot
tiempo.
be maintained in secret.
Me comprometo a
And
la
I
celosa
commit
vigilancia de la
to
Iglesia
a careful
para proteger a los
oversight
menores
to ensure
y
that
prometo
youth are
que todos
protected
los responsables
and that all responsible
rendirán cuenta.
will be
Ustedes
held accountable.
Should have said he was talking to a crowd mostly of bishops. Joining me to talk more about it, CNN religion editor Daniel Burke. Also with me, CNN senior Vatican analyst John Allen, and Bruce Feiler, best-selling author, contributor for CNN, author of Walking the Bible and other books. Daniel, let's start with you. Talk more about this meeting that the Pope had today.
Right, so we know that the Pope prayed with the victims, we know that he embraced them, we know that he listened to their stories, and I think perhaps most importantly, he said that there would be justice for all victims harmed by the church, and he promised responsibility, all of the people who were responsible for it would be punished, which is something that advocates for victims of sexual abuse have been asking for years.
We have heard from advocates of sexual abuse who have said, look, this is not enough, that this Pope has had meetings before, other popes have as well. In terms of what has actually been done, the church likes to kind of put this as something that occurred in the past. Is that where it is now in the past?
Well, I mean, you're right. This is actually the 7th time a pope has met with victims of sexual abuse. Benedict XVI had 5 such meetings, the first actually coming in the United States in 2008. For the most part, the cases of abuse that we know about have occurred in the past, although there have been a handful of cases that are more recent, and also in some of those cases, the church has been accused of not acting quickly enough. For example, there was a case in Kansas City just a few years ago in which a priest was accused of abusing children, and the bishop was informed of that and delayed a few months before reporting that to the police, which led to a criminal conviction and ultimately to that bishop being removed. Look, Anderson, I think the reality is that the church today in 2015 is in a very different place than it was, say, 10 years ago. When I first started covering this story, there was open denial at the most senior levels of the church. People were talking about this as an American problem, as a media invention. You don't hear that kind of thing anymore. They are officially committed to reform. The issue today is follow-through in reform. There is no real system of accountability yet, not for the crime, but for the cover-up. And in addition to that, there is no uniform global standard. Policies in the United States and Europe are very different than they are in other parts of the world. And I think that's going to be the acid test of whether this meeting is more than a kind of emotive encounter, but whether it leads to policy change.
And Bruce, that is the criticism from many survivors of clergy abuse who say this is public relations.
And I have to say, it's been not very effective public relations this week. I think in a week in which the church has masterfully managed the schedule and the themes, that this has not been handled well. It's almost like hearing a politician change his story every day. We began with a speech to bishops, congratulating them on their courage for getting through it. And while that may be true, perhaps we should have started with the victims. And I think I can't help wondering if we wouldn't be in this situation had there been women in the decision-making rooms when they planned this trip. And that's really what this is about, Anderson, which is ultimately the subtext for this whole weekend is about women, right? Okay? Women, 6 of 10 people in the pews, women are more interested in religion. And ultimately, if this church cannot convince Catholic women, Catholic moms in particular, to trust their children in the church, then the church is going to have a real serious problem going
As
forward.
we mentioned, many critics, sexual abuse survivor groups are saying that the Pope Francis has not done enough. For some context, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops found that more than 5,700 priests have been accused of sexual abuse, and these incidents largely go unreported. Furthermore, one bishop in this country has been convicted of ignoring sex abuse of a minor. In June, a Minnesota archdiocese was charged with 6 sex abuse-related crimes. That case is awaiting trial. I want to bring in Becky Ianni. She's a spokeswoman for the Survivors Network of those abused by priests, known as SNAP. She's also a survivor herself of clergy sexual abuse. Becky, thank you for joining us. First, your reaction to the Pope's comments this morning and the very fact that he had a meeting.
Well, I hope that those victims, all 5 of them, I hope they find healing and comfort from meeting with the Pope. But I hope the Pope takes their stories of suffering, their pain, and I hope that encourages not just to say that he's going to hold bishops accountable, not just say that, he's going to do something about this, but to actually do it. And he has enormous power. He could do something today to protect a child.
There are, you do hear some complaints by even members of clergy now who say they're being held to an unreasonable standard, a statute of limitations. Survivors want the statute of limitations in many states extended. They say if it's extended, it should be extended for all who have offended, not just for priests. Talk a little bit, if you can, about what happened to you, because I know it took you, understandably, a very long period of time to see to acknowledge what had happened to you and to come forward about it.
Yes, I was told by my priest that I would go to hell if I told anyone. So as a child, there was no way I was going to tell anyone. And also the nuns told me that priests were sent by God. So I felt like I was being punished by God. I was the bad person. So it took me 40 years to come forward. And when I came forward, the statute of limitations had run out. And so I couldn't do anything. And my case is not that unusual. And we find that the church is lobbying against these laws instead of for them. And when you have a case, then perpetrators are exposed. And when they're exposed and put in jail, then children are safer. And that's what we all want.
And we should point out that your abuser went on to abuse others and when finally revealed, ended up killing himself, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Well, Becky Ianni, I appreciate talking with you this afternoon. We talked to you yesterday as well. Thank you for your strength and for talking with us today. Again, I'm joined by our CNN's Vatican correspondent, Delia Gallagher. Delia is do you think today's meeting, Delia, is really going to change anything?